just wanna have fun, turn around now, turn around now. I just wanna have fun, turn around now, turn around now. I just wanna I wanna turn around, dance, dance, dance. I just wanna I wanna turn around now. I just wanna have fun, turn around now. I just wanna now and turn around now, turn around now. I just wanna I wanna turn around, dance, dance, dance. I just wanna I wanna.
Please welcome the 14th Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden.
Thank you. Thank you, and welcome to the opening celebration of the 2023 Library of Congress National Book Festival. Now we clap. Because the theme of this year's festival is Everyone Has a Story. And this theme is reflected in the year's distinguished author lineup, which reflects the diversity of voices throughout our nation and celebrates the storyteller in us all. This is the National Book Festival's 23rd year, and it remains one of the preeminent literary events in the United States. It's also central to the library's mission to expand our reach and connect with all Americans. The Library of Congress is here to share its rich collections of treasures, and we inspire and energize the next generation of thinkers, artists, students, public servants, and more to continue to tell the American story and our collective history. As the largest library in the world, we have the opportunity to champion reading and literacy. And this weekend, we are bringing together an acclaimed, diverse group of authors and illustrators to our nation's capital to celebrate books and the essential place they have in our lives. We do this for the benefit of tens of thousands of book lovers who come in person and those who participate virtually. Now, I suspect that all of you are book lovers, or you would not be here tonight. You know how just a single book can change a life, and how books unlock life's wonders, and how they teach us to live and flourish. And tonight, we're excited to hear from 5 of our distinguished National Book Festival authors. Those who write and illustrate books change our lives in ways both profound and everlasting. And assembled in this auditorium tonight is an extraordinary gathering of talent. But before we begin, we have many to thank. First and foremost, the United States Congress, the library's chief benefactor since it was established in 1800. No library in history has enjoyed such long-lasting and generous support. However, without private sector support, there would not be a National Book Festival. And our most generous supporter is festival co-chair, Mr. David N. Rubenstein. I've often heard David speak of his belief that books and reading are keys to success in life. And as some of you may know, we share a history at the Enoch Pratt Free Library, which was David's library growing up in Baltimore, in which I had the honor to lead for more than 20 years. David has never forgotten the seminal role libraries played in his life, and he demonstrates this through his support of the Library of Congress. And David, we continue to be most grateful. We're also so thankful to all of our sponsors who make the festival possible, including our charter sponsors, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the Washington Post, our patron sponsors, General Motors, the James Madison Council, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the National... I think a lot of them are here. and the National Endowment for the Humanities. They're here too, and so are our champion sponsors, CoStar Group and the John W. Kluge Center. And we have many friends and media partners and exhibitors. Now, the National Book Festival is and has been one of the most inspirational free events in the nation's capital. And it's only possible because of you, our sponsors. And it does take a village to put on a festival like this. So I want to acknowledge the more than 1,000 volunteers, most especially the Junior League of Washington. Which has supported the festival since 2003 with over 40,000 hours, the equivalent of $2.4 million of time. Thank you. And hundreds of volunteers from the general public. And of course, the hardworking Library of Congress staff who are key and vital to the festival's success. So please thank me and join me in that. So now it's my honor to welcome the chair of the library's James Madison Council and the co-chair of the 2023 National Book Festival, Mr. David M. Rubenstein.
So thank you all for coming, and thank you, Carla, for the kind introduction. And I should say as well that Carla's mother is here. Thank you very much for coming from Baltimore. So how many people here have read at least 5 books in the last year? Okay. How many people have read at least 10 books in the last year? How many people have read at least 20 books? How many people have read at least 30 books in the last year? Oh, wow. How many people have really honestly read 50 books? Anybody read 70 books last year? Okay. Anybody read 100 books last year? Okay. Well, congratulations. So, sadly, 44% of Americans did not read a book last year. 44% of American adults did not read a single book last year. Now, that is not a good thing for our country. Our country is not the leading country in the world in literacy. In fact, we are 150th in the world in literacy percentages. 150th. And why is that? Well, there's lots of reasons for it, and we can't describe them all now, but it's a sad fact that we are not very good in literacy. People who can read choose often not to read books, and people, sadly, who can't read can't do very much about it. 130 million adults in this country cannot read a book to their children. One of the best ways to teach a child how to read is to read to the child yourself. And that's how many children, no doubt many of you, learn how to read books from your parents reading to you. But 130 million Americans cannot do it. 21% of all adults in this country are functionally illiterate, 21%, which means that they can't read past the 4th grade level. So 21% of Americans can't read essentially at all. So what does this really mean for our society? Well, of course, it doesn't help you get a job if you can't read. And it turns out that you're going to be very involved in the criminal justice system if you can't read. 85% of people in the juvenile delinquency system in this country are functionally illiterate, which means they can't read past the 4th grade level. 2/3 of the people in the federal prison system are functionally illiterate. So obviously, if you are functionally illiterate, you probably resort to things that aren't great things for our society, and as a result, you often wind up in the juvenile delinquency system or in the federal prison system. So we have to do much more about this. And no book festival is going to solve all these problems, but the National Book Festival is designed to make people realize that we in Washington, D.C., and representing all of the country, believe that it's important to have a festival where the leading authors in the country come to meet with children, to autograph their books, to read from their books, and to explain the importance of reading. Now, it's not called the National Tweet Festival or the National Memo Festival. It's called the National Book Festival. Now, why is that? Because books have a way of focusing the brain in a way that a tweet honestly doesn't, or maybe it's an X now, I don't know. But whatever it is, books have a way of focusing the brain because you have to spend time, you have to really be concentrating for quite some time to read a book. And that really helps the brain evolve. And really, all civilization has evolved from reading not just tweets, but reading books. And so what we're trying to do with the National Book Festival is to say to people, come here, it's for free, come here and meet the great authors and learn more about books, and bring your children so they can see how important it is to adults to have other people read. And also, we want people to come here because we want people to appreciate the importance of reading. We're not going to solve the illiteracy problem in this country. That's not going to be solved overnight. And we're not going to solve the illiteracy problem, which is you can read, but you choose not to. But we can take a step forward, and hopefully people will come here, go back to their hometowns, go back to their communities in the Washington area and say, I was at the National Book Festival, I learned something about reading, and now I really want to do more to help my child learn how to read better and to help actually read better and more myself. So I want to thank all the sponsors, I want to thank the authors, and I also want to thank Laura Bush. For those of you who heard the story a moment ago, as you all know, we are getting ready to celebrate the 250th anniversary of this country. Now, you'd be under a rock if you didn't know we were going to celebrate the 250th anniversary, because we're celebrating it already. But we're not celebrating the 250th anniversary of the National Book Festival. Why is that? Well, we didn't have a book festival in the United States, at least in Washington, for a long time. But what happened was when Laura Bush, a librarian, came to Washington the night before the inauguration, she met with Carla's predecessor, Jim Billington. And in a reception the night before the inauguration, she said to Jim Billington, well, we have a Texas Book Festival. Do you have a book festival in Washington? And he quickly said, no, but we will. And we did. So on the Mall, right afterwards, that spring, I believe it was, they set up the first National Book Festival. It was on the Mall. Remember, any of you remember the time on the Mall? Okay, it was a little dusty from time to time, and sometimes it rained from time to time. But it actually was the first effort of the United States government, really, to do something along the lines of having a book festival. And so over the years, the way the world works, sometimes things happen by happenstance. You don't think it's going to be good, but it turns out it's actually better. So for a while, the National Park Service said, you guys it's nice you're reading books, and it's nice you're encouraging people to read, but you're hurting the grass. What? Yes, the grass can't grow with that book festival there. Yeah, but people can read, mutter. Well, but the grass isn't going to grow. So we kind of got kicked off the Mall for a while, and we went to the convention center. It was supposed to be temporary as the grass grew back, but ultimately we decided actually it would be better at the convention center. So as all of you have been at the Mall and all of you have been at the convention center know, it's probably much better at the convention center. There are more restrooms, the food is better, there's more accommodation. So how many people here would prefer to stay in the convention center? And most people? Okay. So that's what we're going to do tomorrow, and I hope all of you will have an enjoyable time. And I just want to echo what I said earlier. Thank all of you for participating. Hopefully you will take the word back about what the book festival is all about and encourage more people to learn how to read and to read books. And finally, let me thank Carla Hayden, because she's been an indefatigable partner supporting the National Book Festival. It's not a given requirement that the Librarian of Congress has to support the book festival, but she's taken this on and made it an incredible book festival, the biggest in the United States. I want to thank you, Carla, for doing that. Okay. Come on up. Okay, so thank you very much, and now we're going to have our authors. Is that right? Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Please welcome best-selling young adult writer Angeline Boulley.
Buju Anin, Angeline Boulley, Miskwa Makwakwe Nadishnakas, Makwa Dodam, Bawating Indonjaba, Chimagwech. Hello, everyone. I'm Angeline Bully. I'm Bear Clan, and I'm from the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians. Miigwech for this honor to be able to speak Anishinaabe Moin in these hallowed halls. Everyone has a story. I'm always fascinated by the stories behind the stories. And my story, I was a debut author at age 55. And yeah. Thank you. The origin story for my story, I was 18 and I was a senior in high school, and my best friend went to a different school nearby, and she told me about a new boy, senior year, in all of her classes that she thought I might like. I was intrigued and dateless, and so yes, I asked about him. And it turned out that he didn't play sports, and he hung out with the really hardcore stoners, we called them, and so I never met him. And then a month before graduation, she said, "You're never gonna believe it. There was a huge drug bust, and it turned out that the new boy was actually an undercover cop." Well, this was a few years before the original 21 Jump Street. And so I could not believe it. Like, my mind was blown by the idea of a young-looking law enforcement officer posing as a high school senior. And I was raised on soap operas and mysteries. And so I immediately thought, what if we would have met? And what if we would have liked each other? Or what if he needed my help? And then the spark of an idea that had stayed with me for 37 years was, why would some undercover drug investigation need the help of an ordinary 18-year-old Ojibwe girl? Well, by the time I was 44, I had worked out the puzzle pieces of how this story might happen. What if it was a federal drug investigation on a reservation? And what if this young woman was excellent in chemistry? What if she knew traditional medicines, knew her culture and language, and was connected to everybody and everything around her? She actually would be the ideal confidential informant for an FBI investigation. Well, on my reservation, sometimes the FBI and other federal agencies aren't necessarily the good guys, so I had to create some plausible ideas of why she would participate, even reluctantly. I decided at age 44 that I could write the world's worst first draft, and I could live with that failure easier than the regret of never even trying. And so it took 10 years to write a version that I felt was strong enough to get me an agent. It got me an agent within 2 weeks. 2 weeks after we went out on submission, there was a 12-bidder auction, and I sold the US publishing rights. I'm now published in 22 other countries. But wait, there's more. 2 weeks after the book auction, I sold the film rights to the Obamas, Higher Ground Productions. So Firekeeper's Daughter, my Indigenous Nancy Drew meets 21 Jump Street, will be coming to Netflix at some point. I had a mantra while I was writing, and it guides my storytelling, that I write to preserve my culture and I edit to protect it. We Indigenous people have always been storytellers, but we weren't necessarily the ones getting the book deals. Stories about us, but not by us, are more likely to perpetuate stereotypes and inaccurate information that not only harms Native children and teens, but it harms all students who need to learn about Native Americans. Everyone has a story, but for too long, our stories, our Indigenous knowledge, was treated as yet one more resource to be extracted and exploited. Just like land, water, timber, and mineral rights, our stories were mined for their trauma without context or nuance and without sharing our strengths and joy. Everyone has a story. Let's support Indigenous voices telling our stories. Miigwech.
Please welcome New Yorker staff writer David Grann, a finalist for the National Book Award and winner of the Edgar Allan Poe Award.
I feel like that's how we'll all end one day. It's so great to be here among such great authors and to be with you all for the book festival. I wanted to tell you a quick, somewhat eccentric story behind this story, but I think it reveals something fundamental about the nature of writing nonfiction and discerning the truth. And it happened back in 2004 when I was newly hired as a writer at the New Yorker magazine. And I was behind on my contract already to produce a certain number of stories. As most people know me, I'm very slow. And I was frantically fearing I might lose this coveted job. And I was calling everybody for a story idea. And I called a friend who said, well, why don't you look for the giant squid? That would make some news. And my only image back then of a giant squid was from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And I thought it was a myth. But after I got off the phone, I looked it up. And sure enough, it's a real creature. It has eyes the size of a human head, tentacles that can stretch as long as a school bus. But no scientist back then had ever seen one alive. They knew they existed only because these dead carcasses would occasionally float upon the surface of the water. I thought, well, how are you going to tell that story? There's nothing to see. But I did a little more digging, and lo and behold, there are giant squid hunters. They didn't tell you about that when you were a kid growing up. And they had devoted their lives to trying to become the first to document one of these creatures alive. And eventually, I found perhaps the most obsessed giant squid hunter of all, a man in New Zealand named Steve O'Shea. And he had come up with a rather novel scheme. Rather than trying to capture the big calamari, as he put it, he was going to try to capture a baby, only the size of about a cricket, and then grow it in captivity. Now, there was a certain mad genius to the scheme because during spawning periods, hypothetically, there should be more babies, and they would be easier to catch. So I called him up, and he said, guess what? I'm going out on an expedition. Come on down, and we'll make history. And so I rushed to my editors at the New Yorker, David Remnick and Daniel Zaleski. And in my desperation, I may have committed that sin that reporters sometimes do, which is to oversell a story. I showed them maps with squid migrations and assured them that we would be the first to document a baby giant squid, and I'd even get them a photograph. Now, even in those flush days, sending someone to New Zealand was quite expensive, but they said Godspeed and sent me off. And right when I arrived in New Zealand is when I realized things were amiss. First of all, the boat, which I thought would be something like in Jacques Cousteau, turned out to be just a skiff with an outboard motor. Steve O'Shea, my fearless squid hunter, had bankrupted himself looking for this creature, and this is all he had. And his only crew turned out to be a graduate student who got seasick, and myself, who he was ready to put to work. And then he turned to me and he said, I should warn you, mate, there's a wee bit of a cyclone coming our way. He was not exaggerating. There was a cyclone coming our way. It was a national emergency. All the power was soon out. There were gale force winds. And I said, well, that's not a problem. We'll just wait it out. He said, oh, no. Apparently, the giant squid only hatched during this time period off New Zealand. He said, we got to go now. We're going to lose our opportunity. So we get in his car with a trailer with his little skiff. We drive down the road, and we finally get to a shore around twilight. It's getting dark, and he starts to launch the boat in the water. And I said, what are you doing? It's getting dark. Oh, he said, oh. Giant squid rise in the water column at night, so we have to go at night. So then we get off, and we set off into the water. And my squid hunter was deaf from a diving accident, and he then points to a buoy in the distance, And he says to me, "What color is that?" I said, "It's green, can't you see?" He said, "Oh, I'm not just deaf, mate, I'm also colorblind." And then he begins to aim this little boat to this chute between these rocks where the whole ocean and all the tumult seems to be funneling through. And the boat enters it, and I had a flashlight with me, and I pointed in front of me, and all I can see in front of me is a mountain of water about 20 feet high. And then I turn behind me with the flashlight, and all I can see is another mountain. And the boat is going like this. And he turns to me and he says, "You won't find this in New York, will you, mate?" And it was in that moment when I began to wonder whether my captain was fully in command of all his faculties. But somehow, with his fearless determination, he managed to lead us through the chute and out into a spot, and we began to put the traps into the water. They were made of sawed-off or Coke bottles, but that's another story. Into the water they go. He put me to work. I'm no longer an observer. I have to pull them out. We do this hour after hour to no avail. And then one night goes by, we do it the next night, and the next night, still to no avail. And then finally, one time at about 3 in the morning, we pull up the traps, and the graduate student looks at it and he says, "I think that's your dream squid." And Steve O'Shea puts his eye right up to the tank and he says, "It looks like Archie," meaning Architeuthis, the scientific name for a giant squid. And sure enough, it was only about this big, but I could see a big eye and its tentacles. And you have to understand, we were really tired and exhausted, and we had to transfer this thing into another tank. So we're transferring it into this other tank, and suddenly Steve O'Shea says, "Where the hell did it go? It's bloody gone. It's a complete catastrophe." He might have swore. He fell back in his chair, and he had a look of utter despair on his face like I had never seen. And I must confess, do you know what I was thinking in that moment? I'm dead. I am completely dead. I promised my editors we would come out here and get a baby squid and grow it in captivity. And what? We had it, and we lost it. And I thought, I don't have a story. I have absolutely nothing. And it was only after the expedition, as I kind of was still wallowing in my own despair and the despair of this poor squid hunter, that I realized that that was the story. That this was a story about a man, an Ahab, who had devoted his whole life to capturing his grail, and he had it and he lost it. And it was so much more interesting than this fairy tale I had concocted in my imagination. And it taught me something so fundamental about the nature of writing true stories and discerning the truth, that you have to keep your eyes open to the story, that you have to be careful about your blinders or your preconceptions or your biases. You have to recognize the reality sometimes before you. And often, the most profound truths and the deepest stories are the ones we are not even looking for. Thank you so much.
Please welcome former NFL player and writer R.K. Russell.
I would like to start by thanking the good folks at the Library of Congress, all of you for being here and for allowing me to be here and share this story. I would also like to thank my mother, who raised me as a single Black woman in America, making her a superstar. My partner, who is here with me, Corey O'Brien, who loved me before I even knew what it meant to love myself. My manager, who believes in me even when I feel my talents fall short of the opportunity. My agent and the team Anscape for allowing me to write this book and to share this story with whomever may need it. It is an everyday phenomenon to be invited and to still feel like an outsider. I felt that way being invited here to speak with you all tonight. Though I played arguably one of the toughest sports in America, moments like these are more intimidating to me than any NFL game. To be invited, but to feel like an outsider is a feeling I've come to know as the unwelcoming. stemming from corrupt systems, conflicts, and wrongdoings, and it is so rooted in otherness that it seems impossible to be both exceptional and accepted. Whether you are a Black man asked to speak in a predominantly white space, or instead a Black man growing up in the South as I did, the unwelcoming is there. Even in the world of sports, where we are bound together by shared uniforms, memorized chants, and through turf and rafters of unison, the game steeps with unwelcoming. Through the fields, through the rafters in which the jerseys hang, and through the lockers. Those experiencing the worst of that are the trans athletes who are excluded from participating with the gender that they know in their soul to be true. Though I speak of my own experiences and voice concerns for BIPOC people and LGBTQ+ folk at large, I know that unwelcoming transcends race and gender and sexuality. At one point or another, we have all felt like outsiders, whether invited or not. I have to ask myself, regardless of these external forces, what it is inside of me that looks for reasons that I do not belong in places that I have been invited to or that I live amongst. As a Black bisexual man, I thought the unwelcoming would be my life companion. It wasn't until I came out in a personal essay in 2019 as the first NFL player to openly identify as bisexual that I realized I did not need an invitation to belong. When I accepted myself, no one else's acceptance mattered. As I stated before, there's a good reason why so many people feel unwelcome, erased, attacked, whether it be bigotry, anti-LGBTQ+ legislation, book bans, or taking away a woman's right to make decisions regarding her own body. There is clear and true cause for so many of us feeling like our very existence is being challenged. But we do not have to carry that around with us everywhere. As writers and authors and storytellers and purveyors of story, we get to redefine acceptance, to show the beautiful parts of our worlds and communities that often don't get the shine they deserve. And we get to talk about the problems we all face together as a society. In writing that coming out essay, I remembered that writing was my first love before football. I lost my stepfather very young as a child. And instead of seeking religion or guidance from parents or others, I turned to writing to express my emotions, my feelings, my thoughts that even at 6 I couldn't understand myself. Somehow the pen knew what my heart could not put into words. I never felt like a stranger when writing in my journals. I always felt as though I belonged when reading books, whether the experience was about someone like me or someone that was different. My memoir, The Yards Between Us, is not just an invitation to those who feel like me or look like me. Though I hope that people feel seen and that people unlike me get to share my experience and create empathy around those topics that for them are so far removed, an invitation is not enough. I hope my book, like so many others here today and here this weekend, gives people the courage to accept themselves. The thought and the mantra that we all have a story is true, but it is also something that brings us unlimited power and connection. There is no story more valuable than another. There is no existence more prized than another. And though I stand here today amongst you at this podium, I am in awe of you and of the things that it takes for us all to get here together in this society and in this world. I hope to encourage everyone to keep reading, to keep writing, to keep loving, to keep experiencing new experiences, whether they be in the page or in your real life, and hopefully the courage to allow yourself to feel as welcomed as you are. Thank you.
Please welcome Beverly Gage, the winner of the 2023 Pulitzer Prize in Biography.
Thank you. Well, these are all hard acts to follow, but it's a great pleasure to be here, especially to be here in Washington, which is a place that I spent a lot of time in the 12 years that I was writing this biography of J. Edgar Hoover. Some of you may know Washington was Hoover's hometown. He was born here, just a few blocks away from where we are right now. He lived here his whole life. He died in the city of Washington, and he never worked for anyone but the federal government. It is a particular pleasure to be here, though, at the Library of Congress, because the Library of Congress is the place that J. Edgar Hoover got his start. When he graduated from high school in 1913, having gone to Central High School in Washington, which was the most prominent white public high school in a segregated school system, he needed a job to fund his way through law school at George Washington University, and he ended up here at the Library of Congress. This was a moment of excitement for the library. The new Library of Congress classification system was just coming into being, and Hoover was there as a young man on the cutting edge of this information technology. And it is thanks to the Library of Congress that he learned to classify things, to organize information, to be administratively efficient, and to keep effective files. So I really didn't want to let this moment pass without saying thank you, Library of Congress, for giving us J. Edgar Hoover. Now, I will take it from some of the laughter in the audience that this is not a room full of Hoover admirers, and I would like to say here at the outset that I myself am not an admirer of J. Edgar Hoover. I did not set out to write a biography of Hoover because I wanted to redeem him or because I wanted to convince other people to admire him in some way. Very early on, when I was just getting started writing this biography, I was on a panel with two of my historian colleagues at Yale who were also writing biographies. One was John Gaddis, who was writing a biography of George Kennan, the great Cold War strategist and thinker. One was David Blight, who was writing a biography of Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist. And there I was writing a biography of J. Edgar Hoover. And what was interesting to me about that panel was that though we were all engaged in this project called biography, we each had radically different relationships with our subjects. John Gaddis was writing about someone that he actually knew. This was a semi-authorized biography. George Kennan had said, go forth and write about me, but do it once I am gone. And then he proceeded to live to be more than 100 years old. So that was a complicated biographical relationship. David Blight was writing about someone that he deeply admired, someone that he had spent his career thinking about, and someone who was among the most admired figures in all of American history. And I had a slightly different problem than that, which is that I was going to write a big book about someone who was among the most universally hated figures of the 20th century. I want to say, though, that that was one of the things that made me want to write about Hoover. He is often portrayed in our public culture, in our popular culture, as a sort of one-dimensional villain, right? This figure who sat in the back room, listening in on everyone, pulling strings, manipulating and threatening people. And to be frank, that is a big part of what this book is about, because he did a lot of those things. But as I really began to think about his history, what struck me was how inadequate that image was was to understanding not only who he was, but the kind of power that he wielded, how he came to wield that power in the first place, and how he stayed in office for so long. For those of you who are not deep in the Hoover story, I will just offer a few facts. The first is that he was director of the FBI for 48 years. He was there from 1924 to 1972. So just to fill that out a little bit more, he was appointed under Calvin Coolidge. He then stayed on under Herbert Hoover, right, the dawn of the Great Depression. They were not related. There were lots of news stories about that at the time. He was then there for all 3+ terms of Franklin Roosevelt's presidency. So he's there through the New Deal. He's there through all of the Second World War. He stays under Harry Truman. He's there for McCarthyism, for the Red Scare. He stays on under Dwight Eisenhower through the 1950s. He is there under John Kennedy. He is there under Lyndon Johnson. And he is there under Richard Nixon, and finally dies in May of 1972, still in office. So one of the things that really drew me to writing about Hoover was this amazing sweep of time, the fact that he had his fingers in everything, but also that there were really important and I think complicated things to say about the changes in the city of Washington throughout that period, changes in the federal government, and particularly the growth of the federal government and its security state during that period, and a story of how a single bureaucrat could wield enough power to reshape many, many aspects of American politics, from our law and order politics, the way law enforcement in this country is carried out, to its broader politics, constraining as well as sometimes enabling movements like the civil rights movement, like the anti-war movement in the 60s, the labor movement, and other major social movements of the 20th century. So that's what drew me to Hoover. And I just want to finish by confessing that I also had a few concerns about whether the world, in fact, wanted a big fat biography of J. Edgar Hoover. The first of those was that in our polarized moment, Hoover doesn't fit very neatly into political categories that we know. He was a deep believer in the nobility of professional government service, in nonpartisan service, in career service. That would stand outside of politics, and that is, of course, most government work going on, something we might call a kind of liberal or progressive government tradition. And he was also a deep ideological conservative, particularly on questions of race, anti-communism, religion, a whole host of other questions. And what he did was put those two traditions together in a way that we don't see reflected in our politics very effectively, I think. And so I wondered if we could, in fact, have a conversation about this more complicated politics and what it might tell us about the present. My other deep anxiety in these 12 years was, as David Rubenstein said, this is not a period in which, the 800-page book is a big piece of cultural currency. And so I was a little concerned that in our quick take world, there wasn't going to be a place for a book like this. And I am just enormously grateful and heartened to find that there really is, that there is a whole world of people who want to read this kind of book. And I suspect of the people in this room, a whole world of people who still want to write this kind of book. And I want to finish off by saying that while we're here at the National Book Festival celebrating the Library of Congress as champions of the book, they're also an amazing archival resource and are champions for the kind of archival research that goes into writing the sort of history that I wrote and continue to write that couldn't be done without these amazing Washington institutions. So thank you all for that.
Please welcome Pulitzer Prize and National Book Critics Circle Award finalist, Luis Alberto Urrea.
Buenas tardes, Librería Congresional. Tijuana in the house. It's not only Tijuana in the house, but there are American heroes everywhere. Miss Carla, you are such a hero to all of us. But I want to talk to you about someone else. My mother's in the house. You can't see her, but she's here, I promise you. My mother was a war hero and a book lover. She loved libraries more than anything. And the thought that I would be lecturing about her here at the Library of Congress would have made her mad with joy. So let me tell you a little bit about her. My mother was the only American in my Tijuana family. She was also the only person who had come from somewhere really alien to the rest of us. She was from New York City. And we didn't understand the rules of life in New York City. My mother was born in 1916, and she was raised through the 20s and 30s in New York. And at a certain point, she fled New York and came here to Washington, D.C. to be trained to join the Red Cross and go to World War II. She was in a group, not nurses, that were known as donut dollies. And donut dollies are someone I need to tell you about as well as about my mother. But just to give you an idea of who she was and how it fell in the dirt street in Tijuana where my family lived. She never learned Spanish, so she would make it up as she went along. And she had these quirks. I didn't know what Manhattan was all about. I didn't know what it must have been like in the 30s, the 20s. Her family had an antique store on North Broadway, and one of their clients was Albert Einstein. And her uncle went out drinking beer with him and called him Al, which to me was kind of cool, but what did I know? And she had this, I just want you to see her as best I can before I tell you the story. So she thought she was a movie star. She was 5'3", auburn hair. She had all these affectations left over from the flapper era. Whenever there was a party, including with our Mexican family, she would stand in this kind of pose. I used to call it the teapot. And she would move her hand as she spoke to you. And she liked jewelry. So she often had a big old ring and she would make a show of it. And she also smoked like Betty Davis for effect, you know? So now you're seeing my mother. And if you said something funny, or what she thought was funny, even if it was in Spanish and she didn't quite understand it, she would take a puff and say, "Oh, darling." So she came to Washington to train, fleeing a terrible relationship. And I wrote a novel about it. And the novel's Goodnight, Irene. People have asked me, why didn't you write a nonfiction book about it? And I tried, but one of the interesting reasons those women are forgotten is that the records building for the Red Cross with all of their information burned down. So they were erased physically, but also culturally. You know, I think it didn't seem heroic enough to have these brave women driving into combat to help the soldiers, not medically. They drove trucks about the size of this backdrop. If you cut off 2 columns and raise it, that was the truck they drove, a GMC 2.5-ton 6x truck with a galley built on the back that had a full kitchen or they made donuts and coffee, and they had a record player so they could play records for the boys fighting in Europe. They also ministered to them. They also gave them guidance. They also gave them hope. They also played card games with them. They helped them sometimes when they broke down emotionally. Those boys didn't know who they could talk to. So that's what my mother did. And you need to know some things about that. She came here and trained. They left here in a convoy of ships to England. She served troops freshly arrived, took a train from Liverpool to London, which was bombed by the Germans, got to England and worked on bomber bases in Cambridgeshire in the northeast of England, attending to the pilots. There's no record that they were ever there. Even the people who run the sort of museum space that air base was had no recollection or any proof that those women had lived there and taken care of the soldiers. They landed on Utah Beach. They joined Patton and stormed through Western Europe. They saw the liberation of Paris. They were trapped in the siege of Bastogne. They were caught in the Battle of the Bulge. They followed Patton in the Third Army through all of Germany. And when they arrived at Weimar, they helped liberate Buchenwald. After all this, my mother was wounded terribly in a Jeep crash in the Bavarian Alps. So she kept it quiet. Any of you who have veterans in your families probably know this, that it's very hard to find out. And I didn't know. I saw my mother as the flamboyant one. I didn't know she was a hero. I wouldn't have known what to do with that information. But one day, she had her Army footlocker, and it was full of stuff, and I was told not to ever open it. And I, of course, promised, no way, Mom, I'll never open it. No, not me. And she went to work one day, and I was like, all right, you know. And I was going through it, and I had tried to be careful with everything, but I was just flipping out. There was all kinds of Army stuff and Red Cross stuff and pictures of bombers and all this amazing stuff until I got to the Buchenwald folder. And I had no idea what to do with this. What does this have to do with my mom? You know, I didn't get it. And I put it all away because I thought this is, I don't know, I've stepped into something, I don't know what this is. And I made it super neat and I closed it, and she kept a cloth over it, so I covered it with the cloth. And I thought, I'm just never going to say a word. And I'm telling you all my brothers here, just take one thing away from this conversation. Women are psychic. And my mother came home and she said, "Dear boy, you've been in my box." I said, "No, I have not." She said, "Did you find any photographs?" And I was busted. And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "What did you see?" I said, I saw dead people. I need to explain that place to you. And she told me the story about it. And I won't go into it because it's gruesome and awful. But the thing she said to me, which I've never forgotten, is I was ashamed of myself for taking those photographs. But ever since that war ended, I've been ashamed of myself for not taking more. So my mom, by the time I came along, she was married to my dad, living on a dirt street in Tijuana. Really weird to my relatives. My mother served demitasse cups. And I promise you, there's no Mexican family from Sinaloa who's ever had coffee from a demitasse cup. And they would sip them and say, "Está loca!" But you know, she didn't reveal things, but things came to me later. that I realized that so much of the things in our life was her reliving what she did. All through high school, whenever a guy I knew was in trouble, she would move him into the house. We always had 3 or 4 guys living, and she would work and take care of them. You know, my best friend was gay. He was a dancer. We were in the drama world, and it was very hard times for him in the early 70s. And she was his champion, and she cared for him too. That's my mom. And she's here now with us, listening to this. And I can't thank you enough, and I can't thank all of you enough for giving her this opportunity, because, you know, she was a story lover. And I just want to tell you a little thing that I think may make you understand her a little bit. My mother was in a kind of a cultural war, 100 Mexicans and her. And she wanted to make sure that I, you know, could be an American boy too, because she knew that would be a superpower to have both. So she was such a lover of literature that she used literature to win me over. She started reading Mark Twain to me at night when I was a little kid, and she followed Mark Twain with Kipling. And then she indoctrinated me. I wasn't ready for it, but her hero, Hemingway. Papa. I was like, Papa. Papa rules, man. And you know, she was right, because I started getting that thing. I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to write them down. And she watched. She watched me. And, you know, I come from a town that never had a lending library. Tijuana didn't get a lending library until the 90s. When the Lannan Foundation funded it. So I began to write. I was more and more interested, and she got me a little notebook, and I was writing in my notebook, 69 cents at the drugstore. I thought, dude, somebody published an empty book, I'm gonna fill it. And she saw me doing all this stuff. I'd never applied myself to anything, and I had a stack of pages. And I came home from school one day, and she was waiting for me. Dear boy, I have a little present for you. And honest to God, I thought, oh man, she got me like a James Bond plastic pistol or something, you know? And I went out into the kitchen, and she had gotten her World War II typewriter, cleaned it up, put it on the table with some paper. And I thought, oh crap, man. Typing? And she said, no, seriously, try it. I've got paper here, try it. I think you'll like it. So I put the paper in and suspiciously banged it. Boom. Boom. Whoa, boom, boom, boom. It was so neat. It looked published, because I was never gonna publish. I knew that, I thought. And you know, y'all are young, so you probably don't remember this, but back when there were typewriters, they had ribbons, and the ribbon was black and red, and you could make it if you wanted to type in red or black, and ours was broken, so my words were half black and half red. And I remember saying, I'm on fire, man, you know. So this is what my mother was like. I came home a week or two later from school, equally disgruntled by school. And she said, dear boy, there's another little surprise for you in the kitchen. And I said, really? Yes, go see. And I went out there, and she had sewn my pages together and put a cover on it. And she said, now you have a book. Yeah, I was a best-selling author in my kitchen. So I just want to say I'm so happy that she's here. And I'm so happy that she's probably going to spend forever hanging around these stacks. And one weird miracle that's been happening is that Though the World War II women have now passed, there were Vietnam donut dollies. And they've adopted my wife Cindy and me. And there are going to be some here tomorrow. So if you see them, give them a hug. Tell them they're heroes. They'll be raising hell, so you'll know who they are. I just am so happy that she's happy. Her name was Phyllis. And just so you know, because of the novel, her middle name was Irene. So, thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you to all of our extraordinary presenters, to all of the distinguished authors and illustrators in the audience, to our sponsors. I hope you had a wonderful time tonight and that you enjoy the festival tomorrow. We want to say goodnight to our viewers watching online and on TV.